Well, welcome everybody to another edition of Lewis at Large. Yours truly, Warner Lewis from the flight deck. And of course, that means some smart talk radio, of course, as always, is in your future. In this segment, absolutely no exception. We are going to take you to a place this show has never been before, and that we're going to be talking about the hollow genome with an expert, Dr. William Miller. He's a physician in academic and private practice for over 30 years. There has been spectacular advances in biology, medicine, genetics, and microbiology, and as a result, combining many observations about patterns of disease from medicine with current scientific discoveries. It's encouraged this work, provocative insights into our evolutionary journey with microbial microcosm within each of us. And wow, that is a mouthful. Let's get started right away. Dr. Miller, how are you, my friend?
I'm very good. Thanks for having me on the show. I appreciate it.
Good. Well, the work that you have put out called The Microcosm Within, Evolution and Extinction in the Hologenome. Let's start there. Hologenome, hologenome. Tell us what that is, and in layman's terms, Dr. Miller, the premise here.
The hologenome is a recognition that there has been a sea change in our understanding of just what we are. When you look in the mirror, you see yourself, and you think, well, I'm just one person. You know, I look in the mirror, I think I'm Bill. And a good-looking guy, too, I think. But that's not how nature sees you. The very surprising thing is that you see you as one thing. Nature sees you as an unbelievably complicated collective and collaborative enterprise. It's an enterprise that consists of your own personal cells, the cells that make you think, the cells that you see that you can identify as you, but over 100 trillion other additional cells, microbial cells. And what your eyes can't appreciate is that they outnumber you 10 to 1. This is a very hard thing for people to accept, that they could be a walking around entity, think themselves one person, and certainly that's how our brains appraise it. But in fact, you are this enormous collaborative. And when that becomes understood, and when the implications of this are clearly thought through, you end up with a whole set of new understandings about how biology works on our planet and how evolution has occurred on our planet also.
When you started to put, has this been something that you have been working? It looks, the work is, it's scientific, although it's written primarily in script, very few charts in here. When you started this work, did you have any idea where it would head, or did you come in with any kind of predispositions or theories?
No, actually, I'll give you a quick indication, because the way things got started was so strange. I was a physician in active practice for a long time, but I was actually a radiologist and imager. The advantage of it, though, is I got to see an enormous array of diseases. It's a specialty that extends across all the other specialties because it supports them all. So you get to learn a tremendous amount of diseases, like every body part. You see absolutely everything. And I go to Chicago for a major national meeting, and I'm going to these educational programs. And at a certain point, my head is full, and I say, I'm going to play hooky. I'm going to go late in the afternoon after hours and hours of scientific sessions. I'm going to go to the Field Museum and just look around. And I walk inside. This is quite a long time ago. And I don't know how many of your listeners may have ever gone to the Field Museum in Chicago, but in the big central atrium, there is Sue. So this all got started by Sue. Sue is an enormous Tyrannosaurus rex. It's a terrific fossil. It's unbelievable when you see it. Well, here's the thing, though. I'm looking at those huge dinosaur bones, and I just noticed that the bones, I mean, given the huge difference in scale, I mean, a dinosaur femur, the big thigh bone, is, just unbelievably large. It's as big as you are. But it's just the dinosaur's femur bone. But when you look at it, and you look at the features on the bone, like I knew well from dissections and from radiology, even the shape of it was quite familiar, and even the places where the big muscles insert are very similar. And I'm looking at that, and I'm saying, This thing died 65 million years ago. They're telling me right on the plaque. But that bone looks a lot like my bone. What is going on? And that just got me started thinking. And I don't know why. I just couldn't put it down. And so I ended up really without any specifically preconceived notion. But what's different about me compared to most evolutionary biologists is I didn't start out being told what I had to believe. I started out without knowing much about it. And so I could learn new things along the way.
Well, if you just joined us, yours truly, Warner Lewis, here from the flight deck, of course, of Lewis at Large, and a very interesting segment here. We're talking to Dr. William B. Miller. He is a physician in academic and private practice for over 3 decades. We are talking about some groundbreaking theory and some research here. The work is called The Microcosm Within, Evolution and Extinction in the Hologenome. And one of those very profound narratives, so to speak, that you're putting forward is that Darwin's theory of evolution, in essence, is wrong. It is not at all, in any way, shape, or form, or in the way we thought it was, a gradual random process based on natural selection. It is much more complicated.
That's right. And I want your listeners to know right at the outside, I'm not a person that says Darwin was wrong because there's some higher power that's the absolute creator. This is different from intelligent design or creationism. This is strongly biologically based, just as Darwinism is. And I want you to understand, I'd like the audience to understand too right from the get-go, there's a lot of good science that indicates that natural selection as a standalone theory and random genetic variation as the source of how natural selection can act is not sufficient in and of itself. And of course, there are lots of people that think it is. The problem is when you look at a lot of evidence, you look at timescales, and you examine the science as it has been presented, several things that would make everything make sense have been missing. One is the abundance of genetic interchange, that the fact that organisms can interchange genes. It's called horizontal genetic transfer. This is abundant throughout our biologic system. For example, HIV, the virus HIV, gets into our genome. It doesn't just infect you in the way people think that it infects you and makes you sick. It actually goes into your central DNA. That's its specific ability as a retrovirus. The point is that a much better and much more coherent system of evolution can be built on several things. Cells can cooperate to change outcomes so that they can exist in preferred states, that they can engineer outcomes. So it's not purely random. There's a lot of randomness to it, but it's not purely random. The second thing is that there's an opportunity for interchange between genetic particles that is not simply random. And that's what we look at as infectious disease is also the same process. It's the targets of opportunity that are different and its effects. And lastly, and this is the most important part, to understand evolution, you have to understand immunology. And immunology rules evolution just as it governs our health. And the surprising thing is that this is the part that astonished me. As I looked over the literature with gathering interest, as my interest deepened, I'm looking at it from a physician's perspective, and I'm saying they've missed this almost an entire science. This just seems to stand aside on its own when immunological factors are the central player. Think of it this way. What governs more than anything the length of your life and even the chance of your being born? Immunological factors, sure. I mean, car accidents aside. You cannot get conceived unless the immunological factors align appropriately, cell to cell, to let you be who you are. If they don't, you never come into being to begin with. At every stage of your life, you live in an exquisite balance of immunological forces that permit you to stay alive and to progress and develop from infant to adult. And eventually, most of us are going to die at a certain point in time when our immunological system wears out, according to what we're granted on this planet. The end result of all this is the other surprising thing I didn't know about when I started is that there's a thing called the hologenome. That complex creatures are very different than we'd ever imagined, so fundamentally different that it makes your head spin. But you have to ask yourself a larger question. It's not like there are just one or two hologenomes. That's the only way complex creatures exist on this planet. And if you're going to have a coherent system to talk about evolution, you have to have an excellent path of reasoning, scientific analysis that enables that hologenomes are the exclusive product of the multicellular world. When you put that all together, you end up recognizing that the general narrative of natural selection, based on random occurrences and even that it has to be very, very gradual, cannot be supported. That there's a vast amount of science that says other things are in operation.
Is there, if we look at the origin of the species, and that, as they say, the weak pigs die, so to speak, are you saying that well, obviously that's true. Stronger species do seem to survive over time. What you're saying is that may still happen, but it's not at all the primary factor in our evolution. Is that reasonable to assume?
Precisely. You've hit it on the nose. Here's the thing. I'm not saying natural selection doesn't operate or work. Of course it does. We see that. We see evidence of it all the time. The question is precisely this. And let me back up just real quickly. Charles Darwin, in his seminal work, the thing that he's known for, the natural selection part, that was in a book in 1859 on the origin of species is the way a long title starts, on the origin of species. Well, here's the thing that most people don't know. He doesn't actually say how species originate. What he talks about is descent by gradual modification and natural selection. And then by implication, he thinks, this same process leads to species. And that's what the scientific community has believed for 150 years. There's only one problem with it. It doesn't work that way. Species come about differently. They come about because of immunological interplay based on infectious disease dynamics, the insertion, the transfer of genetic code between hologenomic participants. One aspect of the hologenome to another, and organism to organism, and free genetic material, which is abundant, invisible to us, but abundant on this planet. That's how species arise. Natural selection still operates. Once the new species comes into existence by immunological factors, natural selection acts to maintain the integrity of the species, to keep it fit. So natural selection is still really important, and it's a beautiful thought, and Darwin gets lots of credit. But what we're doing is changing the place within the narrative that natural selection operates. It's not that it doesn't. It just operates differently than we had thought. And after 150 years, we're allowed to think about it quite differently than we had.
Well, this is pretty heady stuff for a Sunday morning here. Yours truly, Warner
It probably
Lewis.
is.
Yours truly, Warner Lewis here from the Flight Deck of Lewis at Large Radio. We're talking to Dr. William Miller. He is a physician and academic and also private practice for over 30 years. An extraordinary new work called The Microcosm Within, Evolution and Extinction in the Hologenome. Heady stuff here for breakfast this Sunday morning. But let's go to the world, the scientific community. When they read this work that doesn't challenge Darwinism necessarily, but it certainly is shedding a new light and shining lights into corners that may not have been given their due as much, according to you. What evolution is really all about, and what is really the big factors here. What has been your reaction from what I guess loosely referred to as the traditional scientific community and traditional thought on this?
My reaction has been one of two extremes. People either are very attracted to it and think it's a really excellent set of ideas, or they hate it. And it's the reaction in general has been much more robust than I expected. After all, I make it plain. I didn't start as an evolutionary biologist, and I don't know how many of your listeners know much about the world of academia, but it's a pretty tough world out there. The people, the men and women that rise to the top in academia, have worked their hearts out to get where they are, and they fervently believe in their research and in what they've done. So ideas necessarily change slowly, and an outsider poking his nose into a complex topic is ordinarily just dismissed from the get-go. I've been very lucky in being able to get quite a bit of attention from academics who I admire particularly, and by admiring them, that doesn't mean I agree with them. Absolutely, I just know that they are very fine thinkers and researchers, and so many of them have reviewed my work. Some of them think it's very laudable, and others think it's terrible. And a lot of it depends on flexibility of mind. Fortunately, many of the people who I've had a chance to interact with have great flexibility. And I'll tell you, if you have the moment, the part that people find hardest, and I find this over and over again, and I think your listeners will too. Part of what I have to say, and if people will look at the book, all cells have awareness. This is a tough thing to accept. You know, I'm not talking about awareness like you and I do. They don't choose which brand of yogurt to buy. But they're aware within their scope and skills, and they can make little tiny changes to sustain the spot that they want to be. That's the hidden narrative behind disease states. Why does meningococcus go to the meninges? I mean, this sounds like a silly thing, but how is it that physicians can accurately predict which organism is the very most likely one to cause a major infection of one type or another? If you come down with pneumonia, a doctor's first thought is not going to be syphilis. He's going to think about Haemophilus, influenza. Why is that pattern repetitive? It's because microorganisms who have to travel a very long way around the body through lots of the local ecologies that make us up can make a choice about its best environment. Now, most people say, well, it just flops there and it wants to be there. Well, it isn't really the case. The organism the microbe is making a decision based on its needs. That's partly biochemical, but there's a certain extra essence to it. And this is called microbial cognition. And I know this is going to be tough for people to accept, but every single cell inside you has the ability to participate in its own well-being to its own tiniest little extent. And that's the part that I find both academics and the lay reader have the greatest problem with. And this is the last thing I'll say about it. The most surprising aspect of it is this. Of all the myriad things I say in my book, and I say a lot of stuff, that's the one thing that's unassailably true, because the experimental evidence and the observations that we can make this absolutely so. I know this is a tough thing for people. Even my best friends, doctor best friends, they say, I just can't believe a cell can make a decision of any kind. Well, this is not my decision, my idea. It's, in fact, just about the only thing that I assert that isn't my idea. That's what science tells us, and it's an uncomfortable truth for us.
What, as we start to wind down here a little bit, Dr. Miller, I know our audience is thinking, I know they're taking copious notes, by the way.
I'm sure they are. They have to be, of course.
They put down their paper and they've turned off their iPad. They're listening very feverishly here. But
I'm sure their pulse rate is up.
Yep.
They're breathing heavily.
Yeah,
I understand.
They're bouncing off the walls. They're mad it's not a talk show. But anyway, what? And this is not meant to be. This is meant with respect and everything else. What why do we care as lay people? Okay, let's put it there into the lay community. What and how now, based on the theories and some of the thought process that you're putting forward on how we have evolved or arrived at where we are, how does that change our thinking, just from a layman's point of view, about who we are as a species?
Well, this is a terrific question, and I'm going to keep this as compact as I can because I know our time is not infinite here, for multiple reasons. First of all, I think that there's something in each of us, some more than others, I will certainly say, that yearns to understand how they came to be who they are. So the book is important because it explains in a rational and a pretty detailed but a very rational way how they came to be that is different than they ever understood before. Secondly, they will learn that they are actually physically different than they thought they were, because they will understand that they're whole genomic beings. Thirdly, because of our new understanding about the interaction of microbial life and its cellular activity within us, which is absolutely necessary for us to survive, we are going to start a whole new wave of medical change that will concentrate on hologenomic therapies. So it will we'll continue to use drugs as we have, but we will also begin to manipulate our microbial partners, especially for chronic diseases. For example, there's no time to go through all this, but there is very good research showing that there are some critical links between hologenomic participants' microbes and diabetes and other chronic illnesses like autoimmune disorders, many forms of arthritis, and even mood disorders. There have been links that have been made, just beginning links to things like autism. Now, none of these have been absolutely proved yet, but we are finding out that in order to improve the quality of our lives, we're going to have to understand what we are as these, what we call hologenomic organisms or holobionts. We got to understand this balance of forces. This balance of forces concept is curiously Eastern as compared to our Western side, which is we'll give you a pill and make you better. Eastern thought in medicine has always been a bit more about seeing humans as a balance of forces. And that's where medicine is going to go. That's a critical change, and it's going to have an enormously positive impact on human health, especially in aging population that is susceptible to chronic diseases, which in many circumstances will turn out to be growing immunological imbalances based on forces inside us that we hadn't known about before. And then lastly, when people understand how what we consider as infectious disease dynamics extends through every biological phenomenon, when we talk about certain other issues which are critical to society, like climate change issues, it could change the focus of where we're going to put our money. For example, we're barraged with information about climate change, and many people fervently believe that's true, and others are unconvinced that humans are the cause. They do expect us to be participants in very expensive programs, of carbon capture, sequestration, a sudden shift to alternative and relatively inefficient fuels. These are all very expensive things with an uncertain return. But we can spend our money well if we recognize that the single most important impact that climate change will have, as real as it may be or not, is going to be on human health through a shift of infectious disease patterns. Malaria patterns will change. Dengue fever patterns are changing. West Nile virus is coming up through Arizona, and that is shifting also. New diseases are emerging in the Western Hemisphere for the first time from Africa. Chikungunya is a disease from Africa that's swept through the Caribbean, and now we're seeing it in the United States. With global travel, diseases can go faster. My point is this. If we're going to spend money about climate change, and we're worried about it, then the first place we should spend it is on understanding infectious disease dynamics better and working more vigorously for cures and vaccines for those things that actually plague us. The seas can rise. The tides may be greater or not. we can adapt to those things. But cropland pests with new pests spreading through crops and the foods we eat, and diseases that will afflict us, we can spend the money on those things. Mosquito netting as an anti-malarial thing. These are cheap things compared to some of these schemes that the lobbyists are cooking up for us. So that's my message.
Well, it is a fascinating subject. It is deep. It is broad. Some scientists in the scientific community, I'm sure, would say it is controversial, but it is definitely well thought. And the case is laid out in a very, very comprehensive manner. The work is called The Microcosm Within, Evolution and Extinction in the Hologenome by Dr. William Miller. He's a physician, again, in academic and private practice, has done a tremendous amount of work on who we are and how did we get here, and therefore where might we be going. Hey, Dr. Miller, the work is published by Universal Publishers. How can people find out more about these new theories of evolution and extinction and get a copy of the book?
Well, it's widely available at my publisher, Universal Publishers. There's one site. They can go to Amazon and Barnes & Noble and put in The Microcosm Within, and it'll pop right up. I would welcome their doing so. I have a website, themicrocosmwithin.com. Go in it, take a look at it. There's some blogs for you to look at. Send me an email if you'd like to chat.
Well, we appreciate your time, appreciate your work, and best of luck to you. It'll be fascinating to see how this plays out.
Thanks very much. I've really enjoyed the opportunity to connect with your listeners.
Great. You bet. We will be back with more right after this on Lewis at Large.